You know, usually when something in our day-to-day lives breaks down, like, say, a car or a laptop, there's this comforting expectation of precision.
Oh, absolutely. You take your car to the mechanic, they plug that little computer into the dashboard, and
Right, it spits out an exact error code. Boom, problem identified.
yeah, it's entirely binary. Like, it's a faulty oxygen sensor. You replace it, the light goes off, and you drive away.
Exactly, it's a clean transaction. But then you step into the world of human relationships, marriages, deep friendships, complicated family
Oh
dynamics.
boy, yeah.
And suddenly that diagnostic scanner is completely useless. We're looking at a landscape of human connection that is incredibly murky.
It really is.
Like, you can't just plug a scanner into a 10-year marriage and get an error code that says, warning, empathy levels dropped below 30%.
Which is incredibly frustrating for the human brain,
Yeah.
right? Because we crave that simple diagnosis.
We really do.
When a relationship fractures or even just stalls out, there is rarely a single, easily identifiable mechanical failure. You are dealing with decades of compounded habits, unspoken expectations, and colliding values.
And that murky landscape is exactly what we are exploring today for you listening, but we're doing it through a very unusual lens. We are jumping into a homily.
Yes, specifically one for the 21st Sunday in Ordinary Time, Year A.
Right. And this isn't just a standard theological reflection. It was delivered by a uniquely qualified figure, Dr. Father Darline Joseph Mary Anathem.
His background is honestly the entire key to why this specific piece of writing is so fascinating.
Yeah, tell him about his credentials, because it's wild.
Okay, so he is actively examining these ancient texts through two distinct, highly specialized lenses simultaneously. First, he is a Roman Catholic priest.
All right.
He serves as the present parish priest of St. Catherine's Wimborne, as well as St. Anthony's West Moors in Dorset. So he has that deep pastoral theological grounding.
But that's not all.
No, not at all. On top of that, he is a chartered psychologist and an integrative psychotherapist.
Which is such a rare combination.
It is. He holds dual doctoral qualifications and has authored several books, along with over 200 articles. And he covers everything from spirituality and psychology to poetry and pastoral experience.
So when he is looking at the relational aspects of human life in comparison to these ancient readings, he isn't just giving a history lesson.
No, he is reading them as a clinical diagnostician of the human condition.
Exactly. And the mission for our deep dive today is to see how Father Darline takes these ancient scriptures, texts that are literally thousands of years old, and uses them to diagnose the very modern toxic habits we bring into our relationships.
It's super compelling.
Right. He is arguing that things like pride, entitlement, and the fear of commitment are fracturing human connection today, and that ancient, almost forgotten virtues are the actual cure.
To understand the modern crisis of how we relate to one another, though, we actually have to go backward first.
Okay, how far backward?
We have to look at how human beings have historically handled pressure, power, and, well, their own pride. Father Darline anchors this first point in a historical crisis from the book of Isaiah, around 715 BC.
Right, so let's set the scene for you listening. This isn't just some minor political disagreement. Jerusalem is under the threat of the Assyrian Empire.
And we really need to understand what the Assyrian war machine meant in the ancient world.
It meant total annihilation, didn't it?
Exactly. The city of Jerusalem is quite literally a pressure cooker of existential anxiety. The elites in the city are panicking.
Right, they're debating whether to desperately form a political alliance with Egypt or to just trust God's protection.
The psychological stress on the leadership is immense.
And right in the middle of this high-stakes, terrifying environment, we meet a royal steward named Shebna.
Yeah. Shebna is effectively the chief of staff. He holds the keys to the palace. His authority is second only to the king.
But instead of managing the crisis...
Right. Instead of reassuring the people or organizing the defenses, Shebna uses this moment of national terror for personal self-aggrandizement.
It's unbelievable.
He is spending resources to literally carve a monumental elite tomb for himself high up in the rock face.
Okay, let's unpack this, because on the surface, talking about an ancient bureaucrat's tomb feels, a bit disconnected from our daily lives.
Sure.
But Shebna is essentially that middle manager or corporate partner who, during a massive company-wide layoff or a PR disaster, is entirely focused on updating their LinkedIn profile.
Oh, that is exactly it.
Right. They are protecting their own personal brand and securing their parachute rather than doing the actual work to save the team they are supposed to be leading.
That is the exact psychological profile. He is using a position of immense trust as a platform for his own ego.
Wow.
He views his relationship to the people not as a responsibility, but as an entitlement. And what's fascinating is that modern archaeology actually backs this historical account up.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Archaeologists have discovered rock-cut tombs in Jerusalem with inscriptions matching a royal steward from this exact era.
That is wild.
But the theological and psychological consequence for him is severe. God removes Shebna from his position entirely.
And he replaces him with a man named Eliakim. And the language used to describe Eliakim is so specific. He is given the key of the house of David, and he is described as a peg in a firm place.
A peg in a firm place, which means he brings stability to a dysregulated environment. The key takeaway from Father Darline here is about the nature of authority and connection.
Right.
Leadership, influence, and even our most intimate relationships or trusts. They are given to us to steward, not properties we own to stroke our own egos.
Because when pride enters the dynamic, when you start building your own monument instead of tending to the people entrusted to you, collapse is just inevitable.
Exactly. Which transitions perfectly into how this kind of pride destroys entire communities.
Yeah.
Father Darline points to St. Paul's letter to the Romans, written roughly around AD 56 or 57.
And we aren't just talking about a polite disagreement in a church here.
No, this is a community that is deeply, aggressively fractured.
So what's the social dynamic like in Rome at this time?
It is incredibly tense. You have a mixed community of Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians. A few years prior, the Emperor Claudius had issued an edict expelling all Jews from Rome.
Wow.
So the Jewish Christians had to flee, leaving the Gentile Christians to basically run the church and the community on their own.
And they adapted, right? They formed their own culture, their own leadership structures.
Exactly. But now Claudius is dead, Nero is in power, and the edict has lapsed.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. The Jewish Christians returned to Rome, expecting to step right back into their old homes, their old leadership roles, and their old cultural dominance.
You can just imagine the psychological friction there.
It's massive. You have vicious disputes over identity, over who really belongs, over whose cultural practices are superior.
It sounds like a massive ego-driven turf war.
It really is. Both sides are completely convinced of their own righteousness.
Wait, so Paul has two factions that literally resent each other returning to the same city, and his solution isn't to, draw up a compromise.
No.
He doesn't create a strict set of boundaries or a new org chart. How does he handle it?
What's fascinating here is that he does something incredibly counterintuitive. He doesn't validate either side's pride. Instead, he writes this awe-filled doxology.
A doxology being like a spontaneous hymn or a poem of praise, right?
Yes, exactly. It's an expression of absolute awe at the mystery of God. He writes about how God's wisdom and his judgments completely transcend our tiny human categories.
Oh, wow.
By doing this, Paul is essentially forcing both factions to stop glaring across the table at each other and instead look up.
So the underlying mechanism here is that a shared sense of awe shrinks the ego.
Exactly. Paul's solution is that unity requires humility. Neither the returning Jewish Christians nor the established Gentile Christians can boast because God's providence operates on a level they just cannot possibly comprehend.
So if pride is the ultimate trap, if it ruined Shebna and Isaiah and it was tearing apart the community in Romans, what is the alternative? How does God actually choose the people he entrusts with these metaphorical keys?
We see the answer to that in the gospel reading from Matthew chapter 16.
Yeah.
And again, the geography is doing a lot of the heavy lifting here.
Right. Jesus takes his disciples to Caesarea Philippi.
Yes.
Which is not exactly a quiet pastoral hillside.
Not at all. It is a region dominated by a massive rock cliff face covered in pagan shrines, specifically dedicated to the god Pan, and a massive temple built to honor the Roman emperor.
So it is the absolute epicenter of worldly power, wealth, and imperial intimidation.
Exactly. Standing in the shadow of all this overwhelming human achievement, Jesus asks his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?"
And Peter, true to form, is the one who blurts out the answer. He says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God."
And in response, Jesus renames him. He calls him Peter, which means rock, and says he will build his church on this rock. Then he explicitly echoes that Isaiah reading. He tells Peter, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." Just as Eliakim was given the key as a steward to replace the prideful Shebna, Peter is given the keys.
But here's where it gets really interesting and honestly a bit baffling. Because anyone who is even remotely familiar with Peter knows his resume is a disaster.
Oh, total disaster.
He is famously, spectacularly flawed. He is impulsive. When he tries to walk on water, he panics and sinks.
Yeah.
When Jesus is arrested, he literally cuts a guy's ear off and then hours later swears he has no idea who Jesus even is.
It's true.
He is incredibly volatile, so why on earth would anyone hand the keys of an entire movement to someone with that level of inconsistency?
Well, from a pure human resources perspective, you wouldn't. It seems totally reckless. But this is where Father Darline's psychological expertise really illuminates the theology.
How so?
God isn't looking for a flawless resume. He is looking for a specific psychological posture. He chooses imperfect hearts that remain teachable.
Oh, I like that. So it's about the capacity for growth, not the absence of failure.
Precisely. Look at the contrast. Shebna was highly competent, but he was rigid with try. He couldn't be corrected.
Right.
Peter was a mess, but his greatest strength was his psychological resilience and his capacity for repentance. When Peter failed, he didn't double down on his ego. He wept, he learned, and he returned.
So the mechanism here is that God can work with a teachable, humble heart because those limitations are exactly where grace and strength can enter.
Exactly. The reward isn't for perfection. It's for a willingness to be shaped.
Which is such an immense relief for anyone listening who feels like they're constantly messing up in their own relationships.
Really?
But this is exactly where we need to bridge the gap between ancient theology and, your life right now. How does this actually translate?
This is where it gets really practical.
Yeah, Father Darline takes these biblical virtues, humility, faithfulness, stewardship, and he holds them up like a mirror to our modern, often highly toxic relational habits. Let's look at the first contrast. Humility versus self-promotion.
In the ancient texts, Eliakim is elevated for his humble service, and Peter is chosen because his ego is pliable enough to repent. But modern culture operates on the exact opposite currency.
We are so socially conditioned to reward visibility, personal achievement, and aggressive self-branding.
Absolutely. We live on platforms that demand we curate a flawless image of our lives.
And when you bring that curated self into an intimate relationship, it is poison.
It really is. Father Darline points out that instead of supporting each other, partners end up competing for emotional validation.
Because pride fundamentally blocks repair, doesn't it?
It does. If your central psychological goal is maintaining a perception of perfection, if you are terrified of looking weak, you physically cannot apologize.
Right, because vulnerability registers in the brain as a threat.
Yes. So instead of saying, I messed up, I'm sorry, your defense mechanisms kick in. You deflect, you blame, you gaslight.
And that subtle, persistent pride leads to total relational gridlock. Intimacy just cannot survive where the ego takes up all the oxygen.
That leads directly into the second major contrast Father Darline makes. Faithfulness versus inconsistency.
Right. Peter's defining trait wasn't that he never left, it was that he always came back.
Exactly. But modern dating and relational culture is absolutely terrified of commitment. We have this pervasive desire to always keep our options open, to swipe to the next best thing.
And we need to talk about the physical, neurological toll that takes on a human being.
Oh, psychologically speaking, inconsistency is devastating. When you are in a relationship with someone who always has one foot out the door, someone who won't commit or is emotionally erratic, your nervous system literally cannot settle.
You're constantly walking on eggshells.
Yes, it creates a state of hypervigilance. Your body is pumping cortisol because it perceives the attachment as fragile and unsafe.
Wow.
Father Darline notes that this inconsistency breeds profound, deep-seated insecurity. When partners feel they cannot fundamentally rely on the other person's presence, trust just evaporates.
It generates constant, exhausting friction because the foundation is fundamentally unstable, which ties perfectly into his third comparison, stewardship versus entitlement.
Yes. Both Eliakim and Peter were given their authority specifically so they could serve others. It was a stewardship.
But today, the default approach to relationships is heavy entitlement. The language we use is entirely transactional.
It really is.
It's all, you owe me, my needs have to come first, what am I getting out of this?
It forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question about how we view the people in our lives. Are they human beings entrusted to our care? Or are they simply tools for our own self-actualization?
Oof, that's a hard question.
It is. Entitlement is the absolute death of gratitude. If your baseline assumption is that your partner exists solely to cater to your emotional or physical needs, mutual care just vanishes.
So what does this all mean for the listener? I mean, it sounds like we treat modern relationships the way we treat a consumer subscription service like Netflix or Amazon Prime.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
We want maximum benefits, a completely seamless user experience, and the absolute minimum level of commitment. And the second the relationship gets buggy or it requires actual effort to maintain, we just want to hit cancel and find a new subscription.
That is a highly accurate analogy for modern dating. We want the product without the maintenance.
Yeah.
But Father Darline's synthesis of the scriptures and psychological data is telling us that a relationship is a fragile stewardship. When you treat a person like a consumer good, and you prioritize your own convenience over the hard, messy work of maintaining connection, the inevitable result is chronic systemic conflict.
And he actually provides the clinical data to explain the anatomy of this chronic conflict. He introduces this concept of virtue trade-offs.
Yes, specifically, how we often trade our integrity for convenience.
And this happens in incredibly mundane ways that slowly erode a relationship over time.
Oh, constantly.
Yeah.
In a difficult moment, you are often faced with a choice between honesty and comfort. Let's say your partner wants to spend every holiday with their extremely critical family, and it makes you miserable. The integrity move is to have a hard, uncomfortable conversation about boundaries. The convenience move is to just smile, agree to go, and avoid the argument for another year.
But by choosing convenience, you are quietly building a mountain of resentment.
Exactly. You avoid a 30-minute argument, but you poison the relationship for 6 months.
Wow.
And the research Father Darline points to shows something fascinating. People actually experience a measurable drop in their own baseline happiness when they compromise their internal integrity just to keep the peace.
Because that compromise leads to what he calls value drift.
Yes.
I mean, Peter was able to make his confession at Caesarea Philippi because he was aligned with a core truth. But couples often drift miles apart because they never actually name or discuss their deeper values.
And this brings us to a truly stunning piece of data that Father Darline highlights. 69% of couple conflicts are perpetual.
Wait, 69%?
Yeah, 69%. I want the listener to really let that statistic sink in. Nearly 70% of the arguments you have with your partner are on a permanent, unresolvable loop.
That is staggering.
They are not about facts. They are rooted in fundamental, unchangeable differences in personality, temperament, and core values.
If 69% of our fights are on a loop, aren't we just arguing about who loaded the dishwasher wrong every single week? I mean, it's like trying to fix a leaky roof when the actual problem is a cracked foundation.
That is exactly it. If we connect this to the bigger picture, fighting about the dishes is almost never actually about the dishes.
It's a proxy war.
Yes. It is about unspoken expectations. It's about feeling a lack of respect or realizing you have completely misaligned priorities regarding time and labor. What separates unhappy couples from happy couples isn't the absence of that 69%.
Right.
Happy couples face the exact same perpetual conflicts.
So how do they survive it?
They keep the dialogue open. They don't try to solve the unresolvable differences. Instead, they manage the emotional temperature of the room.
How so?
They use repair attempts, a joke, a gentle touch, an acknowledgement of the other's perspective. It signals, hey, we are okay even though we profoundly disagree on this. Unhappy couples hit that perpetual conflict and they just shut down.
They stonewall. And when the dialogue stops, the silence takes those minor differences and hardens them into deep resentments. The dishwasher basically becomes a symbolic battleground for every single unmet need in the relationship.
Because when values differ and they are never explicitly named, you aren't fighting about chore charts anymore. You're fighting about trust.
Right.
You're fighting about the fact that your partner says they value teamwork, but their actions prioritize avoidance. That mismatch between stated values and actual behavior creates profound disappointment.
So, to bring all these threads together for you listening, what the ancient scriptures of Isaiah and Romans and Matthew, combined with Father Darline's deep psychological insights, are telling us is actually incredibly freeing.
It really is.
You do not need to be perfect to have a successful, deeply connected relationship. You don't need a flawless resume to fulfill your mission in life.
No one is expecting you to plug into a diagnostic scanner and return a clean reading. God doesn't choose perfect people, and healthy relationships aren't built by perfect partners.
Right, they are built by humble, teachable, faithful hearts. Just like Eliakim stepping in for Shebna or Peter being given the keys despite his massive failures, your limitations and your past mistakes are not barriers to your purpose.
What is absolutely required, though, is the willingness to repent, the capacity to return after you fail.
We have to be brave enough to name our core values out loud. We have to keep the dialogue open, especially when it's uncomfortable, and we have to choose to live as stewards of the people who have been entrusted to us.
Yes, we have to choose vulnerability and apology over defensiveness and pride.
Because the modern alternatives we were sold, the relentless self-promotion, the consumer entitlement, the avoidance of hard conversations for the sake of convenience, they only lead to isolation.
They lead straight to that lonely, carved-out tomb Shebna was building for himself on the side of a cliff. Genuine, lasting intimacy simply cannot survive without shared values and the humility to admit when we are wrong.
It really is a powerful synthesis of two worlds that we usually keep completely separate, the spiritual theology of the ancients and the clinical psychology of today.
Absolutely.
But before we wrap up this deep dive into Father Darline's homily, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over on your own time.
Go for it.
Think about the most frustrating, recurring conflict in your closest relationship right now. That one argument you keep having over and over again, week after week. If 69% of fights are actually just proxy wars for hidden values, what is the deeper, unspoken expectation you haven't named yet? And honestly ask yourself, is your own pride the only thing keeping you from finally bringing it into the light?